Welcome to the Love Thy Lawyer and the Alameda County Bar Association podcast, where we talk with attorneys about their lives and careers. I'm your host, Louis Goodman. Today, we welcome David Parnall to the podcast. Mr. Parnall's practice emphasizes trust and estate litigation, administration, and mediation. While at UC Davis, he edited the Law Review, and he has been selected as a Northern California super lawyer. And perhaps most impressively, he is a musician and one of the original music analysts for Pandora Radio. He has also composed his own guitar theme that mimics the theme of this podcast's musical intro. David Parnall, welcome to the Love Thy Lawyer and the Alameda County Bar Association podcast.
Hi, Louis, and thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. Where are you speaking to us from right now?
So I'm speaking to you from Temescal, which is where my office is.
And that's in the city of Oakland, correct?
That's in the city of Oakland, yes.
Can you tell us what kind of practice you have?
Yeah, so I do exclusively trust and estates related work. So I don't do estate planning. I do trust and estates litigation and some administration. There are kind of three lanes in terms of trust and estates, planning, administration, litigation. And 95% of my practice is the latter. And so, it encompasses matters under the probate code and tangential stuff like partition actions for elder abuse, restraining orders, that kind of thing.
Well, I understand the drafting of estate plans, and that's the planning thing that you mentioned. And I understand litigation, that's going to court and fighting about it. Can you tell me a little bit more about what administration is?
Sure, yeah, I liken it to a map or a recipe, right? So the estate planner will come up with the recipe and write it down. The person who's doing the administration, which is, usually estate planners will do that. They follow the recipe, they cook the food, so they go into court to put the plan into effect, the estate plan. So a probate action or a trust administration, seeing that the assets go where they're meant to go, that kind of thing. And then the litigator, I guess, if it's a recipe, comes in when the house is on fire because you've burned the souffle.
Or could you be the one burning the souffle?
Yeah. Yes. Anything can happen.
Where are you from originally?
So originally I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Is that where you went to high school?
Yes. Yeah, I was born and mostly raised in Albuquerque. Although, I had kind of a different childhood where we did a lot of traveling and lived overseas a lot. But starting in high school, I went to high school in Albuquerque, and then I moved out to California for college, et cetera.
How is it that you lived overseas a lot and traveled a lot when you were younger?
Well, so my dad had an interest in traveling. He loved the thrill of it all, but also he was able to marry that to his job. So he was a lawyer and a law professor, and then would take leaves of absence to go do legal development projects overseas. And so we were able to, he would go somewhere, like when I was 6, we lived in Egypt for a year, and he worked on a legal development project there. And then when I was 12, we lived in Tunisia for a year and, doing the same kind of thing.
So did you learn any Arabic while you were over there?
Some Arabic. Mostly French, though, because French was, I think still is, but at least at the time was spoken there as well. I wish that I had learned more Arabic.
When you graduated from high school in Albuquerque, you ultimately went to college. Where'd you go?
I went to UC San Diego. That started my career as a Californian. Although when I was growing up, my mom lived in Berkeley, and so I'd come out here as well. And eventually, after college, migrated up here.
Eventually, you went to law school. Did you take any time off between college and law school?
Yeah, I would actually phrase it differently.
Please.
Yeah, so I didn't take any time off because the last thing I wanted to do was be a lawyer or to have any kind of a career. My first love is music. And so from the time I was 13, all I wanted to do was be a guitar player. And so after college, I went straight into that, living the life of a musician. And so I did that for about 10 years. And then when I was done, it got to a point where I felt like, okay, I need to kind of move on to something else. And that was the point that I decided that I would, after thinking through various things, I decided that I'd go to law school.
Well, let's talk about the music for a minute. What sort of music did you play, and did you travel? Did you go on the road? Did you mainly in the studio? Did you record?
Yeah. So let's see. So it was all about, I kind of tangentially play other instruments, but really it was all about the guitar. And so I studied guitar, I studied music in college, studied with a lot of different teachers, and I kind of started off playing rock music and then went on this journey and learned about all this other music and lived in Spain, and I studied some flamenco, played in an awesome jazz big band down in San Diego, and played and studied classical down there and had some great teachers along the way. And then eventually kind of came back to, playing a lot of kind of Spanish classical guitar, but also playing and writing my own music, rock music. And then played in different groups around the Bay Area. The most famous or the most notable of them was this Celtic rock band. And so we would tour around the country and up in Canada 2-3 times a year, go out for 3 weeks and then play, every weekend down, up and down the West Coast, that kind of thing.
So what was it that got you to say, well, I don't want to be a professional musician anymore. I want to go to law school? And when did you first start really thinking about being a lawyer, and what prompted it?
Yeah, so it was always kind of the path not taken. Growing up at the dinner table, having a law professor in the role of dad, it was this kind of, always this like engaging argument, discussion, debate, policy stuff, There was always something interesting about it to me. But, I had this thing that I wanted to do with music. And, but in retrospect, I think there are two things. One, I knew I always wanted to have a family. I always wanted to have kids, and was fortunate enough to meet people along the way who had played at the highest level of the game and given it up because they didn't want to be away from their kids 300 days out of the year. So from early on, that kind of framed my perspective on music, that even if you achieve the success that so few people achieve, it's not the end all be all.
Yeah, that life on the road is brutal, isn't it?
It is. Yeah,
I've done it.
Like introverts.
Yeah.
It's hell. But then I always felt like there was something kind of missing, even when I was playing in my prime, that there was this kind of seriousness that I needed, like something more substantial that I needed to do. Like, I'm not the type to just go out and have a good time and that kind of thing. Like, I need to be doing something a little more meaningful. And always in the back of my mind, that was kind of a possibility that I would take this path and become a lawyer.
So when did you decide, I'm really going to fill out the applications and take the LSAT, send in the money, where you really make that commitment to go?
Well, I spent maybe 10 years or so, 9-10 years after college, doing the music thing, playing, that kind of thing. But then I hit that point where I felt like, maybe it's time to do something else, and thought about various different things, and then decided that, what best suited me was to try out this law thing and go to law school. And I have a very funny, specific moment where I was on the phone with my dad and I was saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And it was like I could hear someone becoming rabid on the other end of the phone. You could hear like the foam coming out of his mouth, but he was trying to play it cool. He was like, oh yeah, okay, whatever. That's cool, whatever. Do what you want.
But he was happy about it. He was very happy about it. Oh, that's great. Yeah. So what law school did you go to?
I went to UC Davis, King Hall.
How was that experience, especially being a little older than probably most of the students?
Yeah, being older, it was different. I think in ways it was really good. In ways it was challenging because I was out of the school mode and getting back into the school mode. And then, I had other like life considerations that I was kind of holding together. One of the moments that I remember in law school is, we're in class and I'm sitting next to this guy and we're both 1Ls or whatever. And he was just like this brilliant guy. And it was just kind of personally offensive to me that, I thought it through and I was like, well, wait a minute. This guy was watching like Scooby-Doo when I was his age. And here he is giving this awesome answer. Like, the world is not a just place. This is not how it's supposed to work. But I made it through.
Can you give us like a brief history of your career? You got out of law school, then what did you do? And how did you end up in the practice that you're in right now?
Yeah. Well, so that was an interesting experience too, coming out of law school, because I had always felt like I had this thing that was inherently meaningful. And I remember, I think Herbie Hancock, he was giving a commencement speech somewhere, and he was talking about how, like, if you're doing this music thing, it's just kind of inherently a good, meaningful, cool thing. But you get out of, law school and you're, interviewing with these people, lawyers at big firms or whatever, and they're like, yeah, what? We don't care about the fact that you can play a Jimi Hendrix song. And so for the longest time, I felt like I kind of had to, shut off that side of me. And so I got out of school and I got a job doing asbestos defense, which was actually a very good kind of training ground for the first couple of years. And so, I did that, but then 2008 hit, 2009. So I did it for a couple more years than I thought I would. Then I went in and I did real estate litigation and did that for a couple of years. But all the way, like throughout all of this, I kind of felt like, what I was doing, I was just satisfying like numbers on the spreadsheet of a corporate representative. And I wanted to do something that had more meaning for individual people. And so, both of my brothers do personal injury. So I kind of considered getting into doing that, but I had always had this interest in trust and estates. And so I, started really reading up and seeing how fascinating it was, this whole world, and then moved into doing that. And I've been doing that now for the past 10 years or so.
What is it that you really like about practicing law? I mean, you have skills in a number of areas. You could do what you want. You can practice any type of law. You could go back to music. What is it about practicing law that you like that keeps you as an attorney?
So especially in trust and estates, for me, I get to have this feeling that I'm doing something that is helping someone. And I think that I'm not just, punching a clock, and I'm not just looking for a paycheck, but instead there are real people with real problems who I get to use what I know to help. And then I think on a personal level too, trust in the estates is like, I never really felt like I got to be a lawyer like I pictured in law school, where you're thinking and analyzing and writing, until I got into trust and estates. It's just a really rich area of the law, with also not only a huge logical component, but also a huge interpersonal dynamic component. And so to kind of bring all these threads together in service of your clients, I think is fascinating. I feel like I get to live my life as a professional writer for the most part, which is a real privilege.
Can you talk a little bit about the business of practicing law? How's that gone for you? And can you just kind of comment about that?
Well, so I had maybe an atypical, I think certainly an atypical trajectory to my career, but also an atypical trajectory to starting my own firm, where I started out my own firm just, I don't know, 2.5 years ago, something like that, maybe a little more now. But I started, with the goal of purposefully just working by myself, not expanding, because, I have this example of my older brother who built this now very large personal injury firm in New Mexico. And so every year he'd send out a Christmas card. And, at first there were 5 people on the Christmas card. And then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And he's always there in the middle. But this group of people for whom he is responsible, is now at over 100 people. And so I felt like, I don't want that. I don't want to be responsible for all these people. But in terms of the business part of all of this, my thinking has actually changed a lot, where, you have these people around you and you can kind of coordinate this bigger ship to help more people. And in doing so, not only help the people, your clients, but also create an environment for the people who work there too. And so that's actually the point that I'm at now, is starting to really expand, not to 100 people, to be clear, but, to more than 2, which is what I have now.
You're very involved with the Alameda County Bar Association, and this is the Bar Association's podcast. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your involvement with the Alameda County Bar and what that's been like for you.
Well, it's been great. I'm new on the board of the Alameda County Bar Association. And so I'm just, over the past few months, I've been getting my bearings doing that. I've been the chair of the Trust and Estate section for the past couple of years. And that's been really rewarding too, because I've kind of been a double agent, where there's another group in Alameda County for trust and estates attorneys, the East Bay Trust and Estates lawyers, EBTEL. And I've been the chair of the litigation section there for the past 3 years. And so what I'm trying to do is kind of build out the ACBA Trust and Estates section, which has gone well over the past couple of years, and to kind of, coordinate and synchronize the communications between those two groups. But so that's been really rewarding as well. But actually, this is my last year on EBTEL, and I'm going to train my focus on ACBA for the next year or 2 or more.
Well, thank you. What do you think is the best advice you've ever received, or what advice would you give to a new attorney kind of just starting out?
So the best advice that I've ever received, there have been so many moments that I've gotten from people who are kind of further along than me. But there's this one moment that sticks out often, which is this. I was in court one day, and I can't remember what it was for, but I was, court wasn't in session. I was in the hall, and I came across this guy who I didn't really know very well, but we were just talking. And he does I think it was criminal defense down in Hayward or San Leandro or something. And we were talking, and he was talking about his approach to the law. I might be kind of misremembering parts of this story, but this is what it meant to me. He was saying to me, you just have to appreciate what you have when you have it. You have to set up your life so that you can enjoy whatever you have. And he gave this example. He was saying, I had a case, a trial. It was going to last a whole week. And so I had to think to myself, this is great. This is what I do. This is going to be exhilarating. I'm going to help my client. It's going to be awesome. Life is good. But then on a Friday, the Friday before that trial was going to happen, he said, then the case pled out. So all of a sudden, the next week was completely vacant. There was nothing going on the next week. And so he said, I get a vacation and life is good. This is awesome. So my thought was either outcome in that situation was great. And so it was a real moment for me that captured something. And it also illustrated the benefit of just having your ears open to hear what people have to say whenever they have to say it. But, I wonder if that story might sound at all familiar to you.
Well, I wasn't the Hayward San Leandro criminal defense attorney who said that to you, I don't think.
Yes, you were.
I was? Oh, well.
Yeah.
Brilliant guy.
Am I getting that right though? Or has my mind switched that up to serve my own perspective that much better?
No, I don't know. I definitely take the position that looking at things in a positive way and appreciating what you have and having a lot of gratitude for the life that I think probably, certainly myself, but I think probably almost anyone who's listening to this podcast gets to lead is really important. And I've said it before on the podcast, I'll say it again, that I consciously every day have gratitude about how great my life is.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you for remembering.
I don't think I'd be able to do the same thing, and not that you did that, took a vacation. I think for me, it would be like, okay, so I don't have this trial next week. So now I have to spend the next week catching up on all the other things that I had to do now. So I'm still working on the vacation notion.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit in terms of your family life. And I know you have some kids. I know they're very important to you. I know your family's very important to you. How is practicing law and your family life fit into each other?
Well, I think that it's certainly challenging because practicing law is a challenging thing, and, it can be very stressful. And sometimes I'm always apologizing to my kids for being grumpy or stressed out or something like that. And they get it. We're close, we're tight. I mean, the balance is still not there. I think I'll probably finally get that balance when my younger kid leaves the house. So that'll be a little bit bittersweet. But otherwise, it's been very good.
Let's say you came into some real money, $3 or $4 billion. What, if anything, would you do differently in your life?
So I would probably be further along in my career if I weren't so self-deprecating, or further along as an attorney if I weren't so sarcastic. But the facetious, sarcastic side of me says that I would go from kind of not stressing about having enough money to stressing about having too much money. I feel like I have developed a skill and some knowledge and the ability to do something that helps people. I wouldn't give that up, because now that I'm finally kind of starting to get good at it, then you stop? No. I think about this a lot just in terms of like retirement. Like, why would I retire? Because, by then maybe I'll actually, if I had a lot of money, I would do more of the same, but expand it so that I would be able to help more people, I think is the short of it.
Let's say you had a magic wand that was one thing in the world, the legal world or otherwise, that you could change. What would that be?
I would create more empathy. I think that's something that is definitely lacking in legal society, but also in overall society. More of an ability to understand other people's perspectives and honor the fact that even though they might be different from yours or mine, that doesn't mean they're invalid.
Well, Dave, I will have a few more questions for you a little later, but right now we have a couple of other people on the podcast, and I'd like to get their input if you have a question or a comment for Dave. So why don't we start with Ocean Motley? Ocean, you're a veteran of the podcast.
Thanks, Louis. And David, great to hear from you today. Yeah, a lot of thoughts come up for me when I was hearing you talk. I try to narrow it down to two questions. The first is, you seem to have a very great vision. Like, you don't let life get you off track or like what you're supposed to do. Like, you kind of have a vision for yourself. And I'm curious if you are religious or have some kind of spiritual center, like what keeps you focused on something outside of all the craziness that's going around and being a lawyer? That's the first question. And the second is, how do you deal with particularly difficult opposing counsel? Like, you seem very level, but sometimes people can really be provocative or push you, particularly in court. I'm curious how you navigate that.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. I mean, and I think I can take both of those at once. So I'm not religious. I don't adhere to any particular religion. I do kind of feel like there's something greater that kind of binds us. And, my own personal philosophy is that all religions try to speak to that one thing, and they just view it from different perspectives. And so, in that sense, I try to live my life as a lawyer how I would live my life just as a person. And so I think, a lot of times I have to dial back the sarcasm or the humor or the obnoxiousness as a lawyer. But fundamentally, it's more important to me to be a good, kind person. And if I lose sight of that while I'm arguing a case, then I've kind of lost the whole game right there. And so, and that carries forward to dealing with opposing attorneys who might be obnoxious. Like, I kind of see it as this ongoing kind of Zen practice where we're dealing with conflict, but we don't have to be consumed by that conflict. And so even if, our clients are fighting each other, that doesn't mean that we're fighting each other. And if someone is particularly aggressive to me, I was always the person to try to tone down the fights when I was younger. And so it kind of is an opportunity to continually practice at not being taken over by whatever negative state is surrounding you. So in that sense, it's like, even though it's a very negative thing, you can turn it into a positive thing by seeing it as an opportunity to practice. That's the Northern California side of me coming out. And actually, I'll say, I do have Italian blood too. So when the knives come out, sometimes I'm all for it. We can appreciate that.
Thank you, Ocean. Thank you for your answer there, David. Teresa Green, thank you for joining us. Do you have a question or a comment for David?
I don't. I just wanted to say hello. I'm also a trust and estates attorney, so I've appreciated the opportunity to get to know Dave a little more. I think we're quite friendly, practicing in the same area of law. I've enjoyed the podcast.
And Teresa, where is your practice?
20th and Broadway in downtown Oakland.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you.
Actually, Teresa Green is a good person to have on this program right here, because she and I have been friendly for a long time. And then we got a case where we were against each other. And it was a pretty heated situation. And so it was really, I think, one of the first times where I had to oppose someone who I was as friendly with as I was with Teresa. And it went well. And actually, to your question too, Ocean, I had a recent case also where with Teresa it went really well. But in this other case, a very good, not friend, but close professional acquaintance with whom I had worked for a long time on a separate case, we got a case where we were suddenly opposing each other. And it was like Jekyll and Hyde, where he couldn't see that, I was still the same person, but rather I became, kind of this evil person who was attributing all these bad things, to him and everything. And it was such an interesting study in how those two kinds of things can unfold, where, it can either be easy or it can be rough.
Teresa, would you like to comment on your litigation with David?
David was such a good attorney. He was so smart, and I'd lost horribly to him.
Oh, Teresa, it wasn't that bad. Sorry, go ahead.
I do think that we were able to capitalize on our friendly relationship. I was glad that we did not lose perspective of that during our interaction. And ultimately, I'll say the matter fizzled out. And so we weren't able to really see how it concluded. But I did appreciate the professionalism and humanity that Dave showed during that exchange.
Very well.
I want everybody to hear her say that word, professionalism.
After I just tried to imitate her.
I'm a very professional person.
You did say several times how sarcastic you are, so I just let that speak for itself.
All right. Well, thank you, Ocean. Thank you, Teresa. I have a couple other questions here for you, Dave. What is the best way for someone to get in touch with you if an attorney has a case that they wanted to refer you for trust and estates litigation matters, or if they had a question that they wanted to ask you about it? What's the best way to get in contact with David Parnall?
You can contact me and my excellent paralegal operations person through my website, which is at www.davidparnall.com, one word.
And I assume that if we were to Google David Parnall in Oakland as an attorney, we'd come up with you and your website.
Yes, most likely. I think so.
David, is there anything else that you wanted to discuss that we haven't brought up, that anything at all that you'd like to mention or say?
I've heard on your podcast where you ask people, what's the most important thing that an attorney can do? And I often hear the answer to that as, listen. And so, I'm developing and will be developing a career aside, part of my job as a mediator. And I think I was trained to do that, not just by my law professor dad, who raised the arguments, or my two personal injury attorney brothers and my stepmom, who at the dinner table would argue all of them under the table, but also by my Berkeley therapist mom, who taught me what it means to actually listen. And so I think, I've been fortunate enough to kind of have that input coming from those various sources throughout my whole life. And so it's been a great balance, I think.
David Parnall, thank you so much for joining us today on the Love Thy Lawyer podcast and the Alameda County Bar Association. I appreciate your being here, and I thank the other people who've been on the call, Ocean and Teresa. You've made it a lot of fun.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Louis. I really, really appreciate it.
That's it for today's edition of Love Thy Lawyer in collaboration with the Alameda County Bar Association. Please visit the lovethylawyer.com website, where you can find links to all of our episodes. Also, please visit the Alameda County Bar Association website at acbanet.org, where you can find more information about our support of the legal profession, promoting excellence in the legal profession, and facilitating equal access to justice. Thanks to Joel Katz for music, Brian Matheson for technical support, Paul Roberts for social media, and Tracy Harvey. I'm Louis Goodman.
So, it's all about perspective. But I think the more serious answer, though, is that